A farm boy's impossible strategy destroyed 40 Japanese planes all by himself. From 22,000 feet, he watches B-17s fall apart below. Smoke, men bailing out, mothers who will get telegrams. The manual screams, "Stay high, keep formation, preserve your energy." The pilots obey. The bombers die anyway. So he does something banned. He dives, aims where the enemy will be, not where he is. And in one terrible, perfect burst, a zero comes apart, and a bomber keeps flying. He saves crews, but he breaks every rule. Command calls it reckless. Crews call it salvation. Headquarters can't explain the numbers, and the threat of court-martial hangs over every return. If the rules are killing your friends, do you follow them, or risk everything to change them? From 22,000 feet, Lieutenant Richard Bong watches 18 B-17 flying fortresses crawl across the sky below him. They hold perfect formation, tight defensive box, exactly as prescribed in the tactical manual. Each bomber bristles with 12 50 caliber machine guns. The briefing officer's voice echoes in his head. Overlapping fields of fire create an impenetrable sphere. Your job is high cover, nothing more. The Japanese Zeros appear as dots against the jungle canopy, then streaks of silver, then sharks. They hit the formation from above and behind, diving through the high 6 o'clock position. The precise angle where the bomber gunners traverse is slowest, where the interlocking fields of fire have gaps the manual never acknowledges. The first B-17 shudders, smoke trailing from its number 3 engine. The second peels away from formation, already burning. The third simply disintegrates, a blooming flower of orange flame and black smoke at 18,000 feet. Inside Bong's cockpit, there's only the steady hum of his twin Allison engines. The violence below looks almost serene from up here, like watching ships sink in a bathtub. But Bong is counting. 11 parachutes blossom white against the green. 19 men didn't make it out. 19 men whose families will get telegrams next week. The remaining 15 bombers hold formation, textbook discipline, exactly as trained. It makes them perfectly predictable targets. The Zeros circle wide, setting up for another arithmetic in the margins of the official reports. 23% bomber loss rate on escorted missions. Compare that to unescorted night runs, 19%. The math is obscene. Having fighter escorts is somehow making things worse, because the Zeros aren't playing by the manual's rules. They're not diving through the formations like the German FW-190s do over Europe. They're dancing around the edges, exploiting gaps, hitting from angles the defensive sphere doesn't cover. And the American P-38s, chained to their high cover positions by doctrine and the threat of court-martial, can only watch. A fourth B-17 trails smoke now, struggling to maintain altitude. Bong can see the pilot fighting the controls. In the waist windows, gunners are firing, tracers arcing uselessly behind the Zeros already past them. The Japanese pilots have figured out that American fighters locked into formation doctrine are neutered, dangerous only if you're stupid enough to fly into their assigned sectors. Another Zero peels off from the circling pack, beginning its attack run on the smoking bomber. Shallow dive, building speed, lining up on the tail where the blind spot is widest. Bong's hand rests on the control stick. His commander's voice, 3 weeks ago in the briefing hut, is crystal clear in memory. "You break formation, you face court-martial. Do you understand me, Lieutenant?" He understood. The manual is 127 pages of carefully calculated geometry, proven tactics, institutional wisdom. The high-cover doctrine worked in Europe. The numbers backed it up. Challenging it meant challenging the entire command structure, the tactical officers, the doctrine writers back in the States who'd never seen a Zero. But Bong has also been counting something else. The faces in the mess tent. The empty chairs that appear after every mission. The replacement crews who arrive wide-eyed and die wide-eyed 3 sorties later. The bomber pilots who've stopped making eye contact with their fighter escorts, who know that high cover is just another way of saying, "We'll watch you die from a safe altitude." The Zero is committed now, tracers already flickering from its wing guns. The crippled B-17's dorsal gunner is returning fire, but he's shooting at where the Zero was, not where it is. Classic mistake. Horseshoe. He wonders who Caroline is. Girlfriend? Wife? Sister? He wonders if she knows that right now her plane is 7 seconds from becoming her grave. Below, in the waist of that bomber, a 20-year-old gunner from Nebraska is fighting a jam 50 caliber. An 18-year-old from Brooklyn is in the ball turret, watching the Zero grow larger in his sight, knowing his traverse won't be fast enough. The pilot, Bong doesn't know his name, has never met him, is holding the plane steady for his crew, refusing to break formation, even though every instinct must be screaming at him to dive, to run, to do anything but maintain this slow, predictable course. They're doing everything right, everything the manual says, everything their training demanded, and it's killing them. 3 weeks ago, sitting in that humid briefing hut, Bong had watched the tactical officer tap his chalk against the chalkboard with total confidence. The defensive sphere, the altitude advantage, the proven geometry. The officer had finished with a smile. Gentlemen, the science is sound. Trust your training. Trust the doctrine. Bong pushes the stick forward. The P-38 responds instantly, nose dropping into a dive that takes him from 22,000 feet toward the deck, at speeds the manual explicitly warns against. The twin booms of his lightning howl as air rips past them. The altimeter unwinds like a broken clock. His airspeed indicator needle swings past the red line. He is violating formation integrity. He is abandoning his assigned sector. He is trading his altitude advantage for speed and position. The exact opposite of what every instructor, every tactical officer, every page of doctrine says to do. The Zero is still tracking Sweet Caroline, its pilot focused on the kill, not yet aware that the rules just changed. Bong's targeting reticle drifts across empty sky, calculating, leading, hunting not where the enemy is, but where his farm boy instincts say he'll be. The bomber's dorsal gunner is still firing, still missing. The ball turret gunner has stopped shooting, probably out of ammunition, or maybe his traverse finally jammed. The Zero is 3 seconds from firing range. Bong's finger finds the trigger. The solution feels wrong, looks wrong. Smoke, but alive. 10 men aboard who will see tomorrow. 10 families who won't get telegrams. And 1 farm boy from Poplar, Wisconsin, falling through 18,000 feet with enemy fighters above him, and the manual he just shredded, weighing nothing at all. 3 weeks earlier, the briefing hut at Port Moresby smelled like mildew and hot canvas. A ceiling fan rotated slowly overhead, doing nothing except redistributing humid air. 32 pilots sat on wooden folding chairs, notebooks open, pencils ready. Major Harrison stood at the chalkboard, a piece of yellow chalk in his hand. He drew circles, perfect overlapping circles representing B-17s in formation, then arrows indicating fields of fire. The chalk made sharp tapping sounds as he emphasized key points. Gentlemen, this is not theory. This is geometry. Tap. Each B-17 carries 12 50 caliber machine guns. Tap. 18 bombers in formation create a defensive sphere with interlocking fields of fire. He drew radiating lines from each circle. Any fighter that penetrates this sphere faces coordinated fire from multiple gun positions simultaneously. Bong watched from the 3rd row. The diagram was beautiful. Clean lines, perfect angles. It looked like something that should work. Your mission, Harrison continued, is high cover. Maintain 25,000 feet. Preserve your altitude advantage. Do not, I repeat, do not break formation to engage individual targets below your assigned altitude. He underlined the word do not on the board. The bombers can defend themselves. Your job is to prevent diving attacks from above. A hand went up. Lieutenant Morrison, 2 rows ahead. What if we see Zeros attacking the formation below us? The bombers' defensive fire will handle it. Maintain your position. Harrison's tone left no room for interpretation. Every time a fighter breaks formation to chase individual targets, it creates gaps. Gaps get other pilots killed. Bong looked at his notebook. He'd filled 3 pages with the doctrine over the past month. Altitude equals life. Formation integrity above all. Bombers defend themselves with coordinated fire. High cover prevents diving attacks. Engagement range, 200 to 300 yards. Textbook. It was all but something was nagging at him. He'd flown 6 escort missions in the past 3 weeks. The Japanese weren't the Germans. The Zeros were faster, lighter, more maneuverable than anything flying over Europe, and they weren't behaving the way the chalkboard predicted. On his last mission, he'd watched from high cover as a Zero made 3 passes through the bomber formation. 3 passes. The supposedly interlocking fields of fire had hit nothing. The Zero pilot wasn't penetrating the defensive sphere. He was dancing around it, exploiting gaps in the geometry the chalkboard didn't account for. Harrison was still talking. The Pacific Theater follows the same principles. In fact, General Arnold himself has emphasized that tactical doctrine is universal. What works over Berlin works over New Guinea. Bong raised his hand. Harrison nodded. Sir, what's our current loss rate on escorted missions? Harrison's jaw tightened slightly. That information is classified. But sir, the doctrine is sound, Lieutenant. Loss rates fluctuate based on multiple variables. Enemy strength, weather conditions, bombing accuracy. He turned back to the board. What doesn't fluctuate is the mathematical fact that formation discipline saves lives. After the briefing, Bong found Morrison outside. You keeping count? Morrison knew what he meant. Every pilot was tracking the same grim statistics, even if command wouldn't discuss them. Last 3 weeks, 8 B-17s lost on missions we escorted. That's 80 men. How many missions? 11. Bong did the math. 73% mission success rate sounded good until you calculated it differently. 8 bombers out of approximately 35 total across those missions. That was a 23% loss rate. He'd also heard about the night missions. B-17s flying unescorted under cover of darkness. The whispered number was 19% losses. The escorts were making things worse. 4 days later, Lieutenant Commander Stevens stood at the same chalkboard. Different briefing, same message. Your primary responsibility is force preservation. 1 fighter is worth more to this war effort than 1 bomber. If you sacrifice your aircraft chasing individual targets, you're removing yourself from the larger battle. That was the part that stuck in Bong's head like a burr. 4th promised. Then he watched 3 B-17s die in 90 seconds. The Zeros came from behind and below, not diving from above. They exploited the blind spots in the bomber's defensive sphere. Blind spots the chalkboard's perfect circles didn't show. The interlocking fields of fire missed because the Japanese pilots weren't flying into the geometry. They were flying around it. 19 men didn't get out. The 4th B-17 was trailing smoke. Sweet Caroline, her nose art visible even from this altitude. A Zero was lining up for the kill, approaching from the 6 o'clock low position, where the tail gunner's field of fire was obstructed by the horizontal stabilizer. The doctrine was clear in Bong's head. Harrison's voice. Maintain your position. Do not break formation. Stevens' voice. Force preservation above individual targets. The manual's voice. Formation integrity prevents gaps that get pilots killed. But Bong could see what was about to happen. The Zero would close to 200 yards, textbook engagement range, and put cannon rounds into Sweet Caroline's engines. 10 more men would die. The doctrine would call it an acceptable loss rate. The chalkboard would remain unchanged. He thought about the other number he'd been tracking. The one command wouldn't discuss. 23%. The chalkboard was a lie, not because the mathematics were wrong, but because the mathematics assumed the enemy would cooperate with American doctrine. The Japanese weren't cooperating. They were learning, adapting, exploiting every assumption built into those perfect, overlapping circles. Bong's hand moved to the stick. One motion forward would violate everything: formation discipline, altitude preservation, engagement protocol, force conservation. His commander's final words from that first briefing echoed: "You break formation, you face court-martial." The zero closed to 300 yards on Sweet Caroline. Bong pushed the stick forward. The P-38 pitched into a screaming dive. The altimeter unwound. 21,000 feet. 20,000 feet. The airspeed indicator climbed past 400 miles per hour, approaching the P-38's never-exceed speed. Every gauge on the panel was screaming warnings the manual said to obey. Below him, 50 caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon converged on a point in space the Zero hadn't reached yet. Then it did. The enemy aircraft disintegrated. Pieces of wing, fuselage, and engine tumbled through the air. Bong pulled up hard, the G-forces crushing him into his seat, gray edges creeping into his vision. He'd just violated every regulation that mattered. He'd broken formation, abandoned his high cover position, exceeded safe dive speed, and engaged at a range the manual would call suicidal. He'd also saved 10 men. The sky above him was empty, the rest of his formation still holding their positions at 22,000 feet, maintaining the doctrine while he'd shattered it. Bong leveled off at 18,000 feet. The remaining Zeros were reforming. They'd seen what happened. They knew there was now an American fighter below them, alone, vulnerable, cut off from support. The perfect target for the exact diving attacks the doctrine was designed to prevent. He'd traded safety for results, the chalkboard for reality, the manual for math that actually worked. His radio crackled, his flight leader's voice tight with controlled fury. "Bong, return to formation, immediately." Bong looked at Sweet Caroline below him, still flying, still alive. 10 men who would see tomorrow. Worth it. He pointed the P-38's nose toward home, knowing that when he landed, the court-martial threat wouldn't be theoretical anymore. The chalkboard had lied, and he had the empty sky and the burning wreckage to prove it. Inside his P-38, Marge, the world compressed into pure physics, 400 miles per hour, the airframe shuddering, rivets screaming against stress they weren't designed for. Bong's hands steady on the stick, eyes locked on the Zero closing on the crippled B-17 5,000 feet below. The Japanese pilot saw him coming. Standard response, tight climbing turn to the left, maximum G-loading, bleeding the heavier American fighter's energy. The Zero's nose pitched up into a climb that would make a P-38 stall if it tried to follow. Textbook evasion. The tactical manual dedicated 4 pages to this exact scenario, complete with diagrams showing the proper counter-maneuver. Bong ignored all of it. His training instructor's voice. Air that currently contained nothing but tropical haze and distant clouds. Every instinct screamed this was wrong. You don't aim at nothing. You don't point away from your target. But growing up in Poplar, Wisconsin, Bong had spent October mornings in duck blinds with his father. Shotgun cold against his shoulder, watching mallards cross the sky at 40 miles per hour. His father's patient instruction: "Don't shoot where the bird is, son. Shoot where it's going to be. Lead the target. Calculate the intersection of 2 moving objects. Let the duck fly into the pattern." 3 seconds. The Zero still climbing. Bong's fighter diving. The angle closing. His finger rested on the trigger. 4 50 caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon, all harmonized to converge at 100 yards. Point-blank range by doctrine standards. Suicide range, according to the manual. 2 seconds. The Zero starting to level out, exactly as Bong predicted. The pilot thinking he'd won, thinking the American had missed. 1 second. The Zero's nose coming down. The aircraft sliding sideways through the turn, momentum carrying it forward into. Bong squeezed the trigger. The convergence was perfect. All 5 weapon systems opened fire simultaneously. 5 streams of metal meeting at a single point in space exactly as the Zero arrived there. The 1-second burst, maybe 60 rounds total, didn't damage the Zero. It disintegrated it. The 20mm cannon rounds hit first, punching through the aluminum skin like paper. The 50 caliber tracers walked through the cockpit, the engine, the wing root. Bong saw the pilot's canopy shatter, saw the engine cowling tear away, saw the left wing fold upward at an angle that defied physics. Then he was through the debris field, pieces of Zero rattling off his own canopy, the acrid smell of burning aviation fuel flooding his cockpit through the ventilation system. His airspeed indicator read 380 and dropping. The kill had taken less than 5 seconds from dive initiation to impact. He pulled back on the stick, feeling the G-forces press him into his seat. The P-38 groaned, protesting, but held together. 7,000 feet. 8,000. Climbing back toward the bomber formation he'd abandoned. Specifications. Bong realized he'd been fighting something different. He'd been fighting the pilot's decision. The Zero couldn't have done anything else. Given his speed, his altitude, his position relative to Bong's diving attack, the climbing turn was the only logical response. Not the only possible response, the only logical one. The pilot had made the decision any trained aviator would make, and Bong had been waiting for it. This wasn't about faster reflexes or better flying. This was about prediction. Reading the tactical situation and knowing, not guessing, knowing what the enemy pilot would decide. Then being in position before the decision was even made. He thought about the last 6 missions, thought about the patterns he'd been unconsciously tracking. Japanese pilots didn't fly randomly. They flew tactically, making rational decisions based on energy states and position, which meant their decisions were predictable. Aim where they're going to be, not where they are. The counterintuitive truth settled into his bones. He didn't need to be more maneuverable than the Zero. He needed to be more predictive than the pilot. And there was another piece to it, something even more backwards. The manual said maintain 200 to 300 yards firing distance. Gave you room to maneuver, room to adjust, safety margin if the enemy reversed. Made perfect sense on a chalkboard. But at 200 yards, Bong's bullets arrived almost 2 seconds after leaving his guns. 2 seconds for the target to jink, to turn, to evade. At 200 yards, you were shooting at ghosts. At 100 yards, 50 yards, point-blank range where he could see the individual panel lines on the enemy aircraft, the bullets arrived in under a second. No time to evade, no chance to miss. Getting dangerously close wasn't reckless. It was the only way to guarantee the hit. He leveled off at 18,000 feet, scanning for threats. The remaining Zeros had broken off, reforming at altitude. The bomber stream was intact, minus the 3 B-17s already gone. 30 men dead or captured. 30 men killed while their escorts maintained proper high-cover position. Bong checked his fuel. Enough to make it home, barely. His wingman, Lieutenant Davis, American paint. Debris damage from flying through the kill. "Jesus, Lieutenant," the crew chief said, running his hand over a gouge in the nacelle. "How close were you?" Bong thought about the Zero's canopy shattering 15 feet in front of his nose. "Close enough," he said. In the debriefing tent, Major Harrison was waiting. His face was unreadable, but the typed report on his desk wasn't. Bong could see his own name at the top, underlined twice. "1 confirmed kill," Harrison said flatly. "B-17 crew saw the whole thing. They're calling you a hero." Bong waited. "I'm calling you insubordinate. You broke formation, exceeded maximum dive speed, violated minimum engagement distance, abandoned your assigned sector." Harrison's finger tapped each violation on the report. "You ignored every piece of doctrine we teach." "The doctrine was getting them killed, sir." "The doctrine," Harrison said, voice hardening, "keeps pilots alive, keeps formations intact, keeps order in the chaos. You can't just—" 23%, sir." Harrison stopped. 23% bomber loss rate on escorted missions. I've been tracking it. Bong kept his voice level, factual. 19% on unescorted night runs. The escorts are making it worse, not better. That's not. Harrison caught himself, took a breath. One pilot can't change doctrine, Lieutenant. I don't care how good your instincts are. Bong thought about the empty patch of sky, the Zero flying into it exactly when and where he knew it would. Yes, sir, he said. But he didn't believe it. And somewhere in the back of his mind, duck-hunting mathematics were already calculating the next intersection point. Port Moresby, June, 1943. The officers' club smelled like stale cigarette smoke and spilled whiskey, but that wasn't what made Major Gideon's jaw tight. It was the folder in front of General Kenny. Gideon had spent 3 days compiling the report, 17 pages, every violation documented with dates, times, witnesses. Sir, if I may. Kenny held up one hand, still reading. Through the open window they could hear P-38s returning from the morning mission. Their twin engines.
Matter of time before his luck runs out, and we lose one of our best. Best what? Kenny looked up for the first time. Gideon blinked. Sir? You were about to say one of our best. Best what? Pilots? We have 200 pilots. What makes Bong worth this much of your time, Major? The question hung in the humid air. Outside, the P-38s were taxiing now, the engine noise fading to a grumble. He's effective, sir, when he follows procedure. Gideon straightened the papers in front of him unnecessarily. But modern air combat requires discipline, coordinated tactics. We can't have pilots freelancing, inventing their own procedures in the middle of combat. It creates chaos. Other pilots try to follow his example and, do they? Sir? Do other pilots achieve his results when they try to copy him? Gideon's silence was answer enough. Kenny flipped to the last page of the report, the statistics section. He studied it for a long moment and Gideon felt a flicker of satisfaction. The numbers were damning. 17 violations couldn't be ignored, no matter how you felt about. Let me make sure I understand, Kenny said slowly. In the 8 weeks since Lieutenant Bong started, what did you call it? Tactical indiscipline? He glanced at the report. He's achieved 11 confirmed aerial victories. Yes, sir, but the squadron average for the same period is 1.3 kills per pilot. Gideon felt the conversation slipping away from him. Sir, individual performance isn't the only measure of bomber loss rates. Kenny wasn't reading from the report now. He was looking directly at Gideon. On missions where Bong provides escort, what are they? 7%, sir. The words came out reluctantly. But correlation doesn't imply, and on missions with standard escort doctrine? 23%. Gideon heard himself say it and wanted to swallow the words back. But sir, we can't attribute that entirely to one pilot's methods. There are variables: weather, enemy strength, target selection. Kenny leaned back in his chair. The wood creaked. Major, how many men in a B-17 crew? 10, sir. We're building a modern Air Force. That requires standardization, doctrine. If every pilot decides the manual doesn't apply to him, how many pilots are requesting transfers to Bong's squadron? The question came out of nowhere. Gideon fumbled. I don't have those numbers readily available, sir. 43. Kenny opened a different folder on his desk. 43 transfer requests in the last month. Know how many we normally get? 6, maybe 8. He pulled out a sheet of paper. Here's one. Request assignment to any unit where Lieutenant Bong is flying escort. Will accept reduction in rank if necessary. That's from a captain, Major. A captain willing to take a demotion to fly under a lieutenant's protection. Gideon felt heat rising in his face. That's highly irregular, sir. You know what else is irregular? Kenny stood, walked to the window. He pointed at the flight line, where Bong was now talking to his crew chief, hands moving in animated gestures. probably describing how he'd violated physics again. That kid doesn't drink, doesn't gamble, writes letters to his girl back home every night, polite to a fault, says sir and ma'am like his mother's standing right behind him. I'm aware of his personal character, sir. That's not... He's exactly the kind of pilot we want, Kenny continued, except for one problem. He keeps ignoring the manual, keeps violating formation doctrine, keeps getting dangerously close to enemy aircraft. He turned from the window. And he keeps saving lives while doing it. Gideon opened his mouth, closed it. The silence stretched. You're right about one thing, Kenny said finally. He doesn't fly like us. He doesn't fly by the manual. Hell, I'm not sure he's even read the manual. He picked up Gideon's report. You spent 3 days documenting his violations. Let me ask you something. Did you spend any time documenting how he's doing what he's doing? Sir, the methods are clearly... I'm not asking if they're regulation. I'm asking if you understand them. Kenny's voice was calm, almost gentle. Can you explain why he points his aircraft at empty sky and still hits targets? Why his engagement distances are so short? What he's calculating that the rest of us aren't? Gideon felt court-martial the only pilot who's figured out how to beat the zeros. He dropped the torn pages in the wastebasket. Bong stays on flight status. Full combat operations. No restrictions. Sir, the other pilots, tell them what you told me. He doesn't fly like us. They shouldn't try to copy him. Kenny's expression softened slightly. But maybe, just maybe, someone should spend less time documenting his violations and more time figuring out what the hell he's doing right. Gideon stood there, feeling the ground shift under his feet. Everything in his training, his experience, his understanding of how a professional military functioned, it all said this was wrong. You couldn't just ignore the manual because one pilot got lucky, except the numbers said it wasn't luck. Outside, Bong was climbing onto the wing of his P-38, probably for the afternoon mission. Same violations, same impossible tactics, same 27 fewer telegrams. Dismissed, Major, Kenny said quietly. Gideon saluted, turned to leave. At the door, he paused. Sir, what happens when he finally runs out of luck? When his tactics get him killed? Kenny looked out the window at the farm boy from Wisconsin who kept breaking every rule and somehow kept winning. Then we'll go back to doing it your way, Major. And we'll go back to losing 40 men per mission instead of 13. He picked up another folder. Until then, he flies. Gideon walked out into the tropical heat, past the flight line where ground crews were already refueling Bong's P-38 for the afternoon sortie. The kid was talking to his crew chief, grinning about something, looking nothing like a pilot who'd been 30 seconds from court-martial. 43 transfer requests, 27 fewer telegrams, 11 kills in 8 weeks. The doctrine was 127 pages of carefully calculated geometry. Bong had thrown it away and written his own equations in empty sky and closing speeds that shouldn't work. And it was working. Gideon lit a cigarette, watched the P-38s preparing for another mission. Somewhere over New Guinea, Bong would probably violate another 6 regulations, save another bomber crew, come back with more holes in his aircraft, and another impossible story. The manual said it couldn't work. Impossible to dispute. Each kill verified by gun camera footage, witness statements, or wreckage recovered by ground forces. What the citation doesn't mention: 17 documented violations of formation discipline. Average engagement distance of 73 yards, a number that made headquarters officers physically wince when they saw it in reports. The 3 times he flew through debris from planes he'd just destroyed. The collision with a zero, where he'd calculated the impact point so precisely that his wing sheared off the enemy's tail while his own aircraft stayed airborne. MacArthur finishes reading. The assembled officers applaud. Bomber crews, men who'd flown missions with Bong escorting, applaud louder. They understand what headquarters never fully grasped. The farm boy who ignored the manual had kept them alive. The numbers tell 2 different stories. Story 1, the official record, Major Richard Bong, America's ace of aces, 40 confirmed kills, Medal of Honor recipient, model of aggressive fighting spirit. Story 2. The tactical reality. Bomber loss rate on standard escort missions, 23%. Bomber loss rate on missions where Bong provided escort, 7%. Simple arithmetic, 16 fewer bombers lost per 100 missions, 10 crew per bomber, 160 men who went home instead of dying in the Pacific. And that's just counting the missions Bong personally flew. It doesn't count the pilots who quietly started copying his methods, the ones who'd realized that dangerously close was actually close enough to not miss. Major Gideon stands in the back of the crowd watching. 18 months since he'd written that report recommending Bong be grounded. General Kenny had torn it in half without a word. Gideon had been furious then. Now, watching MacArthur pin the medal, he feels something more complicated. He's been tracking the numbers too. The squadron's average kills have crept upward. Not to Bong's level, nobody's at Bong's level, but noticeably higher. From 1.3 confirmed kills per pilot in early 1943 to 4.2 by late 1944. Pilots were learning. Not from official channels, the tactical manual still prescribed maintaining 200 to 300 yard engagement distances and preserving formation integrity. But in the
stateside for war bond tours and publicity. Couple weeks, Bong says. Got a P-80 checkout flight in California first. New jet fighter. They want me to test it. Davis nods. Neither mentions the obvious. Bong's survived 40 encounters with enemy fighters using tactics that should have killed him. Now he's going to fly an experimental aircraft that's already killed 2 test pilots. You ever think, Davis says carefully, about writing it down? The real techniques, I mean, not the bullshit they teach in flight school. Bong shakes his head. They wouldn't publish it, you know that. Maybe after the war, maybe. But Bong's expression says he knows better. The institution tolerated his success. It won't celebrate his methodology. Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada, present day. Captain Sarah Chen sits in a darkened briefing room watching her helmet-mounted display projected on the screen. The symbology looks like something from a science fiction film. Threat vectors, predicted intercept points, weapons employment zones, calculated in real time by computers running millions of calculations per second. Her instructor, a lieutenant colonel with 2,000 hours in the F-35, points to a pulsing circle on the display. This is your WEZ, Weapons Employment Zone. The targeting computer is predicting the enemy aircraft's future position based on current heading, speed, and likely evasion maneuvers. It's calculating where they'll be when your missile arrives, not where they are now. Chen studies the display. The predicted intercept point is 30 degrees off the target's current position. Everything in her brain screams, "This is wrong. You're aiming at empty air." It's called proportional navigation guidance, the instructor continues. Foundation of every air-to-air system since Vietnam. You're not chasing the target. You're intercepting their future position. 23 cadets in the room frantically take notes. This is gospel now. Officially sanctioned, mathematically proven, and coded in software that costs more per line than most people earn in a year. Nobody mentions Richard Bong. The instructor advances to the next slide. Engagement parameters. Modern doctrine emphasizes close-range employment. For an AIM-9X, you want too close to minimum launch range, under a precision, he says. Get close, don't miss. Questions? Chen thinks about this. Everything she's being taught, predictive targeting, close-range engagement, aggressive prosecution of threats, it all feels counterintuitive, like it should be wrong but somehow isn't. After class, she asks the instructor about the history. "Sir, when did we figure this out? The predictive targeting, the close-range stuff." He considers. Proportional navigation? That was developed in the 50s, refined through Vietnam. The aggressive close-range doctrine came from kill ratio analysis post-Gulf War. So it's recent? The mathematical formalization, yes. The underlying principles?
He shrugs. Those are probably older, but I don't know the specifics. August 6th, 1945, Burbank, California. Major Richard Bong climbs into the cockpit of a P-80 Shooting Star, brand new jet fighter, Lockheed's latest. He's done 3 familiarization flights. This is number 4, a routine test, by the book, following all proper procedures. The P-80 is faster than anything he's flown. It's also temperamental. 2 test pilots have already died in crashes. But Bong's careful, methodical. He follows the checklist, checks every gauge, runs through the engine start sequence exactly as trained. At 2:30 p.m., witnesses watch the P-80 take off, climb to 300 feet, then suddenly pitch nose down. The jet slams into a field north of the runway. Bong dies instantly. Later investigation, fuel pump failure, mechanical defect. Nothing Bong could have controlled. The farm boy who survived 40 impossible encounters with enemy fighters, who broke every rule, got dangerously close, and came home every time, died following institutional protocol in a routine test flight. Back at Nellis, Captain Chen is running simulations. The computer generates enemy aircraft, and she practices intercept geometry. Aim where they're going. Calculate the intersection. Close to minimum range. On her 5th run, she gets it. Really gets it. The enemy brakes hard left, and instead of following the turn, she points her nose at empty sky. For half a second, she's aiming at nothing. Then the target completes its maneuver and flies directly into her firing solution. Good doctrine, his violation into procedure, his heresy into scripture. They just forgot to mention his name.